She wasn't invited for her status. She was invited because someone needed to check a box. On a ship where champagne flowed endlessly and greetings were whispered like passwords, Maya Blake carried something no one else on board had: an unshakable calm that came from years of surviving the subtle brutality of polished rooms. She boarded not to be seen, but to remind the system it could no longer look away. Maya Blake was never one to chase attention. She didn't dress to impress boardrooms, didn't network for the sake of proximity. She let her work speak loudly and with integrity. For years, she designed homes in the neighborhoods most architects only drove past. She built not just buildings, but dignity. For that, she earned awards, recognition, and the quiet respect of those who mattered. But that afternoon, as sunlight poured through her studio windows and warmed the worn wood beneath her feet, something arrived that felt off. It wasn't the wording, it was the weight of it. A formal message, polished and flattering, telling her she'd been selected to join a hand-picked group of global leaders aboard a transatlantic voyage. The Astrolux. It called her a distinguished guest, said her work had redefined equity in architecture, that her presence would enrich their exclusive forum on innovation and leadership. She blinked, let the words settle. Astrolux wasn't just any cruise. It was a floating palace for the powerful oil barons, old money investors, legacy politicians, people with last names that opened doors in cities she had once been kept out of. And now they were extending an invitation to her. She tilted her head slightly, reading the message again. This wasn't about inclusion. Not really. This was a performance, a curated gesture, a way to display diversity without ever having to understand it. And still, she didn't delete it. Maya had spent her entire life sitting at tables where no one expected her to be. She was used to the glances, the questions behind the smiles, used to being the first or the only. It had never stopped her before, and it wouldn't now. If they wanted her there to complete the picture, fine. But she'd make sure the picture wasn't as pretty as they thought. She typed her reply. 2 words. I accept, and nothing more. 3 weeks later, she stood at the dock in southern France, suitcase in hand, staring up at the Astrolux. The ship loomed above her like a monument, glass balconies stacked high, chrome railings glistening like polished armor. It was the kind of excess that made silence feel expensive. Guests arrived in black sedans, stepping out in designer suits and gowns, greeted with bows and chilled champagne. Photographers circled like quiet shadows. Every detail screamed curated perfection. Maya wore a simple cream linen dress, the fabric breathing against her skin in the ocean breeze. Around her neck, a bold hand-woven necklace made by one of her students back in Oakland. It stood out not just in color, but in meaning. She waited at the entrance. 3 minutes, then 5. The couple behind her, a white man in a navy suit and a woman draped in silver silk, were welcomed instantly. Their names were known, their preferences remembered. A flute of champagne appeared in each hand before they'd said a word. Maya glanced down. Still nothing. No one asked her name. No one offered her a drink. No one even looked her in the eye. She stepped forward slowly, dragging her carry-on behind her. The marble of the gangway clicked under her heels. Inside, the ship was nothing short of breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers, white velvet walls, polished brass fixtures reflecting gold light across every surface. It was made to impress, to intimidate. She approached the check-in desk. The concierge glanced at her, then past her, as if expecting someone more familiar. When she gave her name, his brow furrowed for a second. Oh, yes, Ms. Blake. Room 17A, Elysian Deck, he said, adjusting his tone to something more polite, but still laced with that underlying question. How did you end up here? She took the gold keycard he handed her and nodded once. No smile. No small talk. It wasn't rudeness, it was restraint. The elevator to the Elysian Deck was silent. The walls were lined with leather. Every corner smelled like money and distance. Her suite was massive floor-to-ceiling windows, silk sheets, a private terrace with a view of the open sea. On the table, a fruit basket and a bottle of wine. But no welcome note. No gesture that said, "We see you." Maya walked to the balcony. The wind played with a strand of her hair as she looked back at the dock, now empty. She had made it. She was here. But she wasn't welcomed. Not really. And that was what struck her. It hadn't been loud. It hadn't been cruel. It had been empty. A quiet rejection wrapped in five-star service. The kind of exclusion that smiled while it erased you. She knew this feeling. It started at her first pitch meeting in Palo Alto. At the charity gala, where someone assumed she was waitstaff. At the design competition, where they called her impressive for someone with her background. It always started with invisibility, with the absence of being seen. And that was always the first sign. But she didn't come here to be accepted. She came to watch. Because what they hadn't realized was this: when Maya Blake entered a space, she didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence carried its own gravity. If you're feeling the weight of this journey already, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories are built to make you think, to feel, and to remember, and what comes next is just the beginning. Maya didn't unpack right away. She stood in her suite, surrounded by imported marble and hand-stitched upholstery, and listened. Not for sounds, but for presence, for the subtle affirmations that someone like her belonged here. None came. The room was quiet, elegant, and indifferent. She stepped out onto her private balcony, where the ship's horn echoed across the port like a ceremonial drum. Below, the last of the guests were boarding. Attendants bowed. Bags were swept away like burdens. But still no one knocked. No one called her name. No personalized card. No welcome briefing. Nothing. It wasn't a mistake. She could feel it. And Maya had learned to trust those feelings. By dinner, the Astrolix had already sailed into international waters. The sky outside was a blue so dark it bled into black. Inside, the lights sparkled like a chandelier suspended above the ocean. Maya made her way to the main dining hall, a cathedral of glass and chrome, where orchestras played soft jazz and silverware shimmered under candlelight. Every table was dressed in white linen, every chair angled just so. This wasn't a restaurant. It was a performance. As she entered, the hostess looked up and blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Name?" the woman asked, almost hesitantly. "Maya Blake." A pause, then a forced smile. "Right this way." But instead of leading her to one of the tables near the center where the conversation buzzed with names that made headlines, Maya was guided to a corner near the glass, far from the curated heart of the room. Her table was half set. No folded napkin. No wine poured. She sat quietly, watching. 3 servers attended a table of white men just 2 rows away. Their drinks were topped off before the glasses were empty. Names were remembered. Laughs exchanged like currency. Across the room, the maître d' approached a woman in a ruby red gown, called her by name, kissed her hand. No one had said Maya's name since she boarded. A young waitress eventually appeared, nervous, apologetic. "I'll be with you in just a moment," she said softly, almost whispering. Maya smiled gently. "Take your time," but her eyes didn't leave the room. She watched the movement of the staff, how they lingered longer at certain tables. How they bent just a little lower when speaking to men in tailored suits. How their eyes slid past Maya, as if her presence made them slightly uncomfortable, like background music in the wrong key. When her appetizer finally arrived 25 minutes later, it was missing the garnish listed on the menu. She didn't say anything, not yet. Instead, she glanced at the waitress. Younger than most, with tired eyes and a tight ponytail. The girl looked at her, hesitated, and leaned in slightly. "They didn't tell me your table was active," she murmured, almost in a whisper. "I only saw it by accident." Maya raised an eyebrow. "But they knew I'd arrived." The girl nodded, biting her lip, then disappeared before she could say more. Maya turned back to her plate. The food was beautifully plated, flavorful, delicate, but it was hard to taste anything over the quiet insult that lingered in the air. A simple truth delivered not with words, but with omission. She wasn't expected. She was simply placed. Halfway through dinner, a small group of men passed her table. One of them, mid-40s, blazer draped over his shoulders, glanced at her briefly, then continued walking. "Is that?" one whispered to the other. "I think so," came the reply. "The architect. From that project in Baltimore or something." No one stopped. No one introduced themselves. They recognized her. They just didn't respect her. Back in her suite, Maya kicked off her shoes and sank into the velvet sofa. She pulled out her tablet and opened the event itinerary. The Astrolux Forum was filled with panels, private dinners, fireside chats, all by invitation only. She scanned the guest list. Every panelist was white, every moderator male, every name followed by a title: managing partner, founding investor, chief strategy officer. And in between all those names, hers stood out like a scratch on glass. She scrolled down to her assigned engagements. One workshop, a 30-minute breakout session on inclusive design principles, scheduled at 8 a.m. On the second morning, no co-panelists, no attendees listed. She sighed. So this was her role, the face of inclusion, but never the voice, a silent trophy on a floating pedestal. But Maya hadn't built her career by being anyone's ornament. And she didn't come here to prove herself to anyone. She came to observe, to confirm a truth she already suspected. It's not what they say, it's what they choose not to do. She closed the tablet, walked to the balcony. The ocean was endless, now black and wide and unknowable. But somewhere in that darkness, Maya smiled to herself, because they had no idea what they just ignited. If you're still with us, you're probably feeling that quiet burn, that slow, suffocating kind of injustice that doesn't scream, but cuts deep. If Maya's story is resonating with you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories that matter, and this one is only beginning to unfold. The morning came wrapped in glassy silence. Sunlight danced on the ocean, crisp and golden, like something sacred. Maya stood at the edge of her private deck, watching the sea stretch endlessly beneath a sky too clean to trust. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. But peace was not what this place was built for. The ship was built to separate, to sort and polish, and decide who belonged where. Without ever saying it out loud, she dressed deliberately that day. A tailored navy jumpsuit, soft silk against her skin. Her hair pulled back in a crown braid, exposing the curve of her neck like armor. On her wrist, a copper bracelet engraved with Swahili scripting Nguvu Kimya, silent strength. She arrived at the breakfast salon exactly at 9 a.m. A hostess scanned her badge, then hesitated. Again. I believe you're, not listed for a table this morning, Miss Blake. Maya arched a brow. I was told meals on this deck are all inclusive. They are, it's just, the woman fumbled. There's a seating chart, and well, perhaps you could wait near the terrace? She gestured toward a smaller lounge with a few unassigned seats tucked just behind the buffet. Mostly empty. Maya didn't flinch. She simply walked, sat, and waited. 10 minutes later, a white couple entered. Same deck, same badge color. They were escorted immediately to the central garden table. Champagne was poured before they sat down. Their laughter reached Maya's ears like a polite slap. She sipped her water. The food, when it finally came, was served without eye contact. A folded menu slid across the table like an afterthought. The waiter didn't ask how she liked her eggs, just wrote it down, walked off. That was the pattern now. Not hostility, just a practiced absence. People didn't stare. They didn't whisper. They just looked past her. She'd become the furniture. That afternoon, the guests gathered in the central atrium for a networking event branded as The Circle. No stage, no mix, just a flowing conversation between the ship's most powerful names. Maya stepped in quietly, scanning the room. Soft piano played from somewhere unseen. Men in double-breasted suits leaned into laughter over glasses of wine. Women in sharp dresses stood in semicircles that never quite opened. And Maya was alone. She approached one of the clusters. 3 men and a woman, mid-conversation about green tech investment. She waited patiently, smiled politely. No one paused. No one made room. Not even eye contact. She stepped back, crossed to another group, introduced herself this time. Hi, I'm Maya Blake, architect and founder of. Before she could finish, someone cut in with a handshake meant for the man beside her. They nodded, smiled vaguely in her direction, then went back to talking amongst themselves. This was no accident. It was a wall built from politeness. Smooth. Elegant. Impenetrable. She circled the room again, slower this time, observing. Every handshake followed a pattern. Every name dropped landed like currency. And every eye that met hers flickered. then looked away. She spotted the ship's event coordinator, a woman in her 50s with a tight chignon and a name tag that read Helen Thatcher, Guest Relations Director. Helen walked toward Maya, smile practiced, posture precise. "Miss Blake," she said, her voice syrupy and controlled. "So lovely to see you. Are you enjoying the voyage so far?" Maya returned the smile, but didn't answer right away. "I'm still getting used to the atmosphere." Helen nodded too quickly. "Yes, well, it does take a bit of adjustment. You know how these spaces are. So many powerful personalities." "I do," Maya said. "Very well." There was a pause. Something flickered behind Helen's eyes. A calculation. Then a slight nod, as if she'd just filed Maya under non-compliant. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask," she said, already turning away. Maya didn't stop her. She didn't need to. She'd seen enough. The way these circles closed before you even reached them. The way access was granted not by merit, but by inheritance of names, skin, pedigree. She returned to her suite in silence. She didn't cry, didn't pace. She opened her laptop, not to write any mail, to record, to observe, to document. She created a folder labeled Deck Culture. She began noting timestamps, behavioral patterns, faces that smiled but never truly saw her. It wasn't paranoia, it was data. And Maya Blake was nothing if not meticulous. She cross-checked seating arrangements against guest names, checked who got room upgrades, who received welcome gifts, who was mentioned in the forum itinerary and who wasn't. The patterns weren't just present, they were systemic. She remembered something one of her mentors had said: exclusion is never random. It's just well disguised. By sunset, Maya had compiled a list. 6 names, 6 guests, all non-white, all subtly relocated to less visible corners of the ship. None of them had spoken at any panel. None of them were seated near executives, and none of them had been acknowledged publicly. But she would. She clicked open her private server access her Foundation's secure network. She sent a message to her assistant, letting her know she needed eyes on Astrolix's operating history. Because something deeper was at play here. Something polished, institutional, and Maya had every intention of breaking it open. The invitation arrived in her suite at 6 p.m., neatly tucked into a cream envelope sealed with gold wax. Inside, scripted calligraphy announced the grand soiree of the Astrolix Renaissance Ball. Black tie, orchestra at 8, dancing beneath the starlit dome. Maya read it once, then again. There was no "we look forward to seeing you," no name on the card. Just a location, a time, and an expectation. She stood before the mirror, brushing one last fold on her dress, a deep emerald green gown with clean lines and no apology. It wasn't about fitting in. It was about showing up on her own terms. She didn't wear diamonds. She wore silence and a gaze that said she wasn't here to be overlooked. The ballroom was a masterclass in illusion. Tall glass columns, golden chandeliers shaped like vines frozen mid-bloom, and a live quartet playing orchestral versions of classic jazz. Guests moved like water, flowing from one circle to the next in satin and tailored wool. Maya entered quietly, heels tapping against the marble, posture impossibly upright. Heads turned, but only for a second. She was noted, then dismissed. She walked past couples laughing in French and German, catching whispers about mergers, IPOs, vineyard acquisitions. And again, not a single voice addressed her. No one extended a hand. No one asked her to dance. No one mentioned her by name. She drifted toward the bar, ordering sparkling water, watching the way the bartender didn't look her in the eyes, until she paid with the black executive guest card. Names floated around her like perfume: Radcliffe, Marrow, Klein, spoken as currency. They danced with each other. They toasted one another. They shared inside jokes that had never needed explaining. Across the floor, Helen Thatcher, the guest relations director, was laughing with a cluster of high-status passengers. Her laughter dimmed slightly when her eyes met Maya's, but just for a breath. Then it returned, as if Maya had never been there. Then came the introductions. A tall man, possibly a senior partner at some London firm, clinked his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, please raise a toast to our most distinguished guest this evening, Mr. Laurent Varnier." Applause. Cameras. He had funded a fintech unicorn last year. Then another toast followed, for a woman who had secured a massive philanthropic contract in the Emirates. Then a young tech founder from Berlin. Each name was celebrated, each face illuminated. Maya watched, waited. There was no fourth toast. No mention of the woman who had redefined urban housing for American cities. No nod to the architect who had taught dozens of first-generation students how to build structures and futures. Nothing. Her existence on this ship remained inconvenient. A waiter passed her with a tray of white truffle canapes. She reached to take one. He paused, subtle but noticeable, then offered the tray with a forced smile and moved quickly on. It wasn't hunger that rose in her chest. It was heat, the quiet, suffocating heat of being deliberately unseen. Maya didn't need a spotlight, but she knew when it was being deliberately redirected. She moved toward the periphery of the dance floor and observed. Every step was calculated, every interaction laced with hierarchy. One woman, blonde, high-cheekboned, likely old money, leaned into a server, whispering, laughing. Gently touching his elbow, he bent closer, amused, compliant. The men in the center spoke in tight clusters, glasses raised high, always at eye level with each other. No one knelt. No one looked up. They had already decided who belonged, and Maya. She wasn't a guest here. She was a reminder of what they didn't want to see, of who they excluded without needing to say a word. As the music swelled into a slow waltz, a few couples moved gracefully across the floor. Maya stood alone at the edge, her glass empty, her presence full. That's when the captain arrived. Captain Lucien Adler, tall, silver-haired, with a posture forged in ceremony, entered the ballroom to polite applause. He nodded at familiar faces, kissed the hands of elder heiresses, shook hands with board members of partner corporations. He moved down the line like royalty and stopped to people away from Maya. He turned, looked past her, and greeted the man beside her instead. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, because in that instant, Maya Blake understood the full choreography of this space. The dance wasn't just on the floor. It was in the way attention was distributed, in who got named, who got praised, who got remembered, and who was left standing elegantly at the edge of a room, as if she were never part of it at all. The morning after the ball, Maya rose before the sun. She didn't sleep much, not from restlessness, but from a growing clarity. Something about last night lingered like fog in her lungs. Not the lights, not the stairs, not even the absence of her name. It was the orchestration of it all, the way people floated through her, as if her presence was a visual disturbance, an elegant echo they didn't want to acknowledge. She pulled on a charcoal-wrapped dress, slipped her feet into flats, and walked out to the executive lounge on Elysian deck. The corridor was empty, the ship humming beneath her steps. Outside, the sea had softened overnight. The sun hadn't yet climbed over the horizon, but the sky held the pale glow of something waiting to happen. The lounge was nearly empty when she entered. Two older men sat near the fireplace murmuring about something in German. A woman in a white tracksuit typed rapidly on a tablet. The space smelled faintly of cinnamon and ocean wind. Maya approached the bar and smiled politely at the young man behind it. His hair was slicked back, his shirt perfectly pressed. He was drying a wine glass, even though it was 7 in the morning. "Good morning," she said. "Could I get a coffee with oat milk?" "No sugar." He looked up, blinked slowly, then nodded. One moment, she stepped back, hands folded. No urgency in her voice, no irritation. She wasn't in a rush. She only wanted to be seen as a guest, as equal. 5 minutes passed, then 10. She noticed the shift. Other guests began to arrive. One, a silver-haired woman in a navy cashmere shawl, approached the bar and ordered a cappuccino. The same attendant nodded, smiled, turned away, and returned within 3 minutes with a delicate porcelain cup and saucer, topped with a biscotti. Maya was still waiting. She moved closer. "Any update on that coffee?" The attendant blinked again, as if surprised she was still there. "We're out of oat milk," he said, too quickly. She paused, then glanced behind him toward the small fridge marked non-dairy options. Inside, she could see the familiar shape of the oat milk carton. And just then, another staff member walked by carrying the lattes and a small ceramic pitcher labeled oat. "I see," she said evenly. The man stiffened. "I'll check again, just in case." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. It wasn't about the milk. It was about the math. Time plus tone plus truth equals intent. When he finally returned, he placed a paper cup in front of her. No saucer. No spoon. No napkin. No acknowledgement of the request. "Here," he said. "It's regular milk. The oat just ran out." Maya stared at the cup, then at him. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a chord gone wrong. "Miles," he said, eyes low. "Well, Miles," she said, her voice still gentle but unmistakably firm. "I ordered oat milk. If it was available, and I asked for it, I expect the same level of service given to other guests." Not an approximation. He didn't answer, just nodded stiffly and stepped back. Maya took the cup, turned, and walked slowly to the corner of the lounge. She sat down near the glass wall overlooking the water and placed the cup still steaming on the marble table. Then she pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. Not of the coffee, exactly, but of the contrast. All around her, guests were sipping from fine china. Servers moved like dancers between them, offering warm towels and fresh pastries. Orders were remembered, preferences honored, names repeated. But for Maya, a paper cup, delivered cold, then dismissed. She opened the secure folder on her tablet, Deck Culture. She created a new subfolder labeled Service Discrepancies and uploaded the photo. She added a note beneath it. Order denied without justification. Oat milk visibly present. Other guests served standard drinkware. Guest presented with inferior container and ignored during service process. She timestamped it, then locked the file. By noon, she returned to the lounge. Not for another drink, but for verification. Miles was gone. In his place, a woman in a gray vest was arranging teacups with careful precision. Maya sat back and watched. Within 20 minutes, the pattern reemerged. A white man ordered an Americano with almond milk. 3 minutes later, porcelain cup. A white woman asked for oat milk flat white. 2 minutes. Delivered on a silver tray, napkin folded into a rose. There was no shortage. No confusion, no mistake. It hadn't been about resources. It had been about choice. She jotted a few more lines in her notes, then opened another file, this one connected to her foundation's oversight system, typically used to monitor discriminatory trends in housing services. She routed her observations through an encrypted channel, tagging a senior analyst to begin data triangulation. She wasn't overreacting. She was collecting evidence. And slowly, the data was speaking louder than she ever could. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind a curtain of gold clouds, Maya stood at the edge of the ship's outer deck. The breeze was cooler now. The ocean had changed color, deeper, almost violet. She thought of every coffee she'd waited for, every flight she'd been ignored on, every panel she wasn't invited to speak at, even when her work built the stage. This was just another version of that old choreography. The quiet reshuffling of priorities, where dignity was handed out based on comfort, not merit. And yet, it always started with something small. A cup, a name, a place in line. They were betting she wouldn't notice. That if they kept it subtle enough, she'd question herself before questioning them. But Maya Blake never mistook subtlety for innocence. By the 4th day, Maya stopped expecting kindness. Not because she gave up, but because she had learned something more important. On the ship, silence wasn't accidental. It was strategic. It wasn't just the wrong coffee, or the absence of greetings. It was the way the staff smiled differently depending on the face they were serving. The way conversations shifted when she approached. The way the eyes of other guests passed over her like she was part of the decor, polished, silent, ignorable. Maya had studied structures her whole life. Concrete, steel, glass. But this was a different kind of architecture. A system of glances and omissions, of nods given to some and withheld from others. And she was done pretending it wasn't real. She began to track everything. Every time her table was served last. Every time her name wasn't used. Every time someone offered politeness with clipped detachment. Each interaction was a thread. And Maya knew how to follow threads. She compiled the incidents in an encrypted document on her tablet, categorized by type: dining, service, protocol, engagement. She began matching patterns with timestamps, comparing her treatment to those around her: race, gender, status, frequency. This wasn't paranoia. It was investigation, and the data was undeniable. One example stood out. A white male executive named Robert Granger had arrived 2 hours after Maya, checked in at the same deck, and by that evening had already been invited to speak on a fintech panel. His background: former hedge fund manager turned crypto strategist. His credentials: unverified. Maya, who had rebuilt entire urban zones, received a workshop slot scheduled at 8 in the morning on a day marked optional engagement. No publicity, no introduction, just a place on the periphery. She double-checked the itinerary, then again. Granger's name appeared 3 times, hers once, and in the briefing packet for speakers, her name was misspelled. That wasn't coincidence. That was an internal decision by someone, somewhere. She knew she needed help, not allies on the ship, but someone who could see what she saw from the outside. In her suite, she opened a secure communication channel to her foundation's operations lead in New York, Olivia Park, a former civil rights analyst who now specialized in systemic service inequality. She typed: activate observation sweep, focus, behavior pattern consistency, subject, Astrolix personnel, Elysian tier service. Within minutes, Olivia responded: understood. Logs initiated. Cross-referencing begins in 20 minutes. Silent. Pattern detection protocol active. That's what Maya trusted. Not outrage. Not confrontation process. Precision. Proof. Later that evening, during a fireside discussion in the upper lounge, Maya chose to stand in the back. She watched as Helen Thatcher, the ship's guest relations director, took the floor to moderate a panel titled Luxury Culture and the Future of Experience. Irony wasn't lost on Maya. Helen wore pearls. Her voice was smooth, polished. She introduced each guest speaker with an anecdote, a compliment, a chuckle. Maya had never received so much as a good morning from her. As the panel began, Maya observed the interaction from afar. Helen never looked left when speaking. Always right. Always toward the male guests. When a black woman in the second row raised her hand, Helen acknowledged her 10 minutes later and redirected the question to a white panelist. Subtle. Seamless. Strategic. Maya logged it. Event: upper lounge panel. Time: 2012. Pattern: deflection of POC input. Amplification of white speaker. Moderator behavior consistent with tier 2 exclusion markers. She pressed save, then leaned back, watching the system perform in real time. The next morning, something shifted. An older man, quiet, British, wearing a blue linen blazer, joined her at breakfast. "May I sit here?" he asked. Maya gestured to the open seat. Of course. He sat, adjusted his napkin, looked around. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "I've been on this ship 9 times, he said quietly. "Never seen it quite like this." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Structured," he replied. "Even for a luxury line. They've always had clicks. Circles. But now it's curated, controlled. The difference is who gets forgotten." Maya didn't respond right away. He continued, "I noticed you weren't introduced last night. You've done remarkable work. I read your feature in Architect Digest. Why aren't they showcasing you?" Maya smiled faintly. "That's not a question they like being asked." He gave a single dry laugh. "You'd think luxury wouldn't fear difference, but it does. Deeply." They spoke for 20 minutes. Not about the ship, but about dignity. Value. The illusion of inclusion. When he left, he gave her a card. "If you ever need an institutional investor who believes in what you build, I'd like to be first in line." She nodded, said nothing. But something inside her shifted. She wasn't invisible. She was inconvenient. And people were starting to notice. That afternoon, Olivia's first report came in. Observation logs confirm service. Prioritization discrepancies on Elysian deck. Comparative service delivery rates showed delays up to 63% for POC guests. Favoritism consistent across 3 staff members. Likelihood of unconscious. BIAS high. Direct policy violation probable. Attached were snippets of internal behavior metrics, video snapshots from hallway cameras, and logs of drink orders showing wait times by guest type. Maya scrolled slowly, absorbing it all. Not fiction, not assumption. Proof. This wasn't just a ship. It was a floating model of institutional discrimination gloved in luxury, hidden beneath jazz and white linen. And she was ready to burn the fawade, not with fire, but with exposure. By the 6th day at sea, the air aboard the Astrolix had changed. The breeze still smelled of salt and designer perfume, but beneath it, something else stirred. The laughter was still polished, the music still elegant, but the illusion of flawless service and seamless inclusion had begun to tremble. Maya moved through the ship like a whisper, not silent, just unseen, which, in her case, was an advantage. Every time a staff member ignored her call, every time her table remained uncleaned while others were being reset, every time she was addressed as ma'am while others were called by name, she logged it. And while the others danced and dined and drank on the upper decks, Maya was orchestrating something entirely different below the surface. That morning, she sat at a small table in the ship's garden atrium, a quiet place where birdsong was piped in through hidden speakers, and the walls were made of living plants. She held her tablet in one hand, her finger gliding through a series of charts generated overnight by Olivia's team. Every data point confirmed what she already knew intuitively. The injustice here was systemic, not situational. Discrimination wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was policy wrapped in politeness. She'd lived long enough in rooms that smiled while pushing her out. But now, for the first time, she had something better than awareness. She had a plan. Inside the ship's internal app, a sleek digital concierge available only to Elysian guests, Maya had found a buried feature, a staff index, not visible to everyone, not advertised, but available through a backdoor she recognized, thanks to her work designing accessible tech interfaces. With a few swipes and a VPN reroute, she gained access to the crew roster, including detailed shift data and guest interaction logs. Not complete records, but enough to find patterns. One name jumped out immediately: Beatrice Lang, Senior Lounge Manager. Beatrice had been on duty during all 3 of Maya's most pointed incidents. Each time her order had been delayed or denied. Another name, Miles Jennings, bar attendant, logged for 12-hour shifts, but with 0 direct guest commendations. His interaction log showed multiple flagged delays, but no internal actions taken. And then, Helen Thatcher. Her name appeared not just as guest relations director, but as the designated overseer for VIP experience. That included panel assignments, dinner seating, and incident resolution. Incident resolution. That word alone pulsed in Maya's chest, because not once, in 6 days, had anyone approached her to ask if her stay was meeting expectations. Not once had anyone checked in. Not even when her name was clearly marked as a keynote speaker on the manifest. Helen wasn't just passive. She was gatekeeping. Maya took a deep breath, then began to copy the log's names, dates, inconsistencies into her encrypted document. At the bottom, she typed, "Systemic suppression likely supported by departmental leadership. Commence personal audit on Helen Thatcher. Request history of prior incidents aboard sister vessels." She hit send. By mid-afternoon, Olivia replied from New York. 3 prior guest complaints filed against Helen Thatcher for bias-related behavior. None escalated. 2 internally dismissed. 1 mysteriously vanished from company database. Now initiating deeper probe. Maya smiled to herself. The system had started cracking. It just didn't know it yet. That evening, Maya did something unexpected. She dressed up, not just elegantly but unmistakably. A sharp black gown with clean lines, bold gold earrings, and hair sculpted into a braided crown. She wore herself like a declaration. And then, she went to the main cocktail reception. Guests turned to look momentarily, then turned back, but one didn't. A man near the champagne bar, tall, suited, mid-50s, watched her with focused eyes. When she met his gaze, he gave the briefest of nods. He recognized her. He walked over slowly. "You're Maya Blake," he said. She didn't answer right away. "I've read about your housing projects in Atlanta," he continued. "You changed how cities think about public space. I always wanted to meet you, Now she smiled, slightly. You just did. They talked for 15 minutes. Then another guest joined. Then another. It didn't take long for the air around Maya to shift. Not fully, but enough to make those watching uncomfortable. Especially Helen. Standing by the main staircase, she noticed. Her posture stiffened. Her gaze lingered. Then she vanished through a side door. Maya didn't follow. She didn't need to. The next morning, Olivia's second report came in. It was heavier. Helen Thatcher has been subject of formal complaints from high-tier guests across multiple voyages. One included the denial of a reserved suite to a black couple, citing misfiled bookings. They were reassigned to a lower floor, no refund issued. Another file was attached, a full transcript of an internal email chain between Helen and a colleague, where she referred to guests from less refined backgrounds as misplaced scholarship tokens. Maya's hands didn't shake. Her breath didn't speed. She'd seen it before. The same condescension. The same calculated disrespect disguised as executive judgment. But now she had documents. Proof. And motive. She uploaded everything into the central archive her foundation used for civil litigation cases. She tagged it, *, internal cultural audit candidate. Then she drafted one more message to Olivia. Prepare phase 2. Cross-reference guest behavior footage. Verify audio surveillance around lounge and ballroom. Highlight favoritism trends by staff. Quietly, cleanly, she stared out the window. The ship was just days from docking. But Maya had no intention of waiting for landfall to shift the tide. The Astrolix glided into international waters like it owned the sea. From the outside, it still looked perfect, a floating palace of taste, elegance, and discretion. But beneath that glimmering shell, a quiet war was unfolding. A war of documents, of silence, of timing. And Maya Blake was no longer just observing it. She was directing it. On the morning of the 8th day, she received the encrypted file, a full investigative briefing, prepared overnight by Olivia's team. It was titled simply, Submerged Report, Phase 1. She opened it while seated alone in the Orchid Library, one of the ship's quietest rooms. No music, no wait staff, just velvet chairs and floor-to-ceiling shelves of curated fiction. She skimmed the first page. Staff behavior summary, service delays for guests of color, 54% higher than white guests. Public naming, acknowledgement during events, 78% white guests. Error corrections, wrong orders, incorrect names, prioritized for white guests in 92% of cases. Then came the footage logs. Maya tapped one. A hallway camera clip began to play. Beatrice Lang, the senior lounge manager, was seen rerouting a server carrying a drink intended for one of the 2 black guests in a nearby room. The tray was placed back on the counter. No explanation. No correction. Another clip showed Helen Thatcher whispering something to the Mactor D as Maya entered the ballroom on night 3. Moments later, Maya was seated far from the speaker's table, despite her credentials. And then, the audio files. Olivia had pulled voice-activated transcriptions from Lounge Mix, legally gray, but technically possible in corporate spaces. In one, Miles Jennings, the same server from the coffee incident, joked to a co-worker. Some of these guests think the badge makes them important. Doesn't change where they came from, though. His voice was casual, relaxed. He didn't know he was being recorded. Maya didn't flinch. She simply stored. This wasn't personal anymore. It was structural. The kind of structure that smiled and asked for feedback after it had already decided who was welcome. The kind that took photos of diverse guests for marketing, then forgot their names at dinner. She added one final line at the bottom of her internal log. This report is no longer about my experience. It's about what happens when a system forgets it's being watched. By mid-afternoon, something changed. Not outside, inside. She could feel it in the air, the way certain staff members hesitated when passing her. How conversations nearby lowered in volume. How glances lingered an extra second too long. Someone had seen the cracks, and someone was trying to patch them. At 3:40 p.m., her sweet phone rang. Miss Blake, Helen Thatcher would like to personally invite you to an exclusive evening salon tonight. Limited seating. She thought you'd enjoy the dialogue. Maya paused. There it was. The first reach. She smiled softly to herself. Please tell Helen I appreciate the invitation, but I prefer to choose my company. She hung up without waiting for a reply. That night, she walked the upper deck under a bruised purple sky, the ocean calm like glass beneath the moon. She wasn't alone. A tall man in a gray blazer, someone she hadn't spoken to before, appeared beside her. You're the one they're pretending not to notice, he said quietly. Maya turned her head slowly. And who are you? Let's just say, I pay attention to who gets erased. He introduced himself as Luis Roca, an international trade consultant, Portuguese-born, black, and visibly careful with his words. I've been watching this ship for years. The patterns, the shifts, they hide it well. You're the first person I've seen who's doing something about it. I'm documenting, Maya said. Not disrupting, he laughed, short and dry. That's what makes it dangerous. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a folded slip of paper. Room for to be. Crew access. The camera in that hallway goes offline every night for maintenance 7 minutes. You didn't hear it from me. She looked at the paper, memorized it, said nothing. At midnight, Maya took the service stairwell down 3 decks. The hallway outside 42 bytes was unremarkable, bare walls, industrial flooring, low light. No music here, no velvet, just utility. She waited until 12:04. The hallway camera light blinked once, then went dark. 7 minutes. She stepped forward and opened the door. Inside, file cabinets .physical.old, but labeled by voyage number, by category, by department. She scanned quickly and found what she was looking for. Guest relations, complaints. One file thinner than it should have been was labeled sensitive feedback, 2023. She opened it. Inside, a stack of printed reports. Most anonymous, most closed. But 3 jumped out, all filed against Helen Thatcher. All detailing race-related exclusion. None with action notes. One simply had the word reviewed stamped in red at the bottom, no initials, no dates. She took photos, quietly, precisely, then returned the file. As she stepped out, the light on the hallway camera blinked back on. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She walked back to her suite slowly, steadily, like someone with nothing to fear. Because now, she didn't. That night, as the ship rocked gently beneath her, Maya lay awake with her tablet glowing beside her. All the silence, all the erasure, all the polished exclusion, it was no longer hidden. It was documented, catalogued, time-stamped, and soon it would be seen. By the 9th day, the ship no longer felt like a luxury cruise. It felt like a theater one where Maya had stepped off script. She wasn't hiding her movements anymore. She walked through the lounges with poise, ordered confidently, asked questions. And though her badge still shimmered gold, the staff's smiles had become thinner, more careful. She wasn't just being noticed now. She was being monitored. It began with the simplest things. Her morning coffee came promptly, but never from the same person twice. The greetings returned, but in voices too polite, too strained. And when she passed by Helen Thatcher in the lower corridor, Helen didn't stop her. She didn't even speak. But her eyes, they flicked sideways, cold, calculating. Maya could feel it. The way people look at you when they know you've seen too much. At breakfast, she found her usual seat occupied by a closed reservation sign. She chose another. Moments later, a server approached and said softly, "I'm sorry, this section is undergoing maintenance. Could you move to the lounge?" Maya looked around. There was no visible maintenance. Other guests were still dining at the adjacent tables. She stood slowly, locked eyes with the server. "This table was mine yesterday, and the day before that." "I understand, ma'am," he replied. "It's a temporary instruction." She stared at him, then at the untouched table. It wasn't about seating. It was a warning, a whisper from the system. "We see you, and we will erase you differently now." She didn't argue. She didn't move. She took out her phone and began typing visibly. The server hesitated, then turned and walked away. An hour later, her tablet disconnected from the ship's guest Wi-Fi. Network error. Retry failed. No connection available. She tried again. Nothing. She stepped out into the corridor. A man from the tech staff passed by. She flagged him down. "My connection's down. Can you check the guest network?" He didn't even take out his scanner. "It happens," he said flatly. "Intermittent signal. Just try again later." But later never came. And Maya wasn't surprised. By early afternoon, a message arrived hand-delivered on thick paper by a staffer who refused eye contact. "Miss Blake, your reserved speaking engagement has been moved to a smaller session. Due to schedule adjustments, the audience capacity has been limited. We appreciate your flexibility." There it was. Not subtle anymore. The ship had begun to shrink her visibility. They couldn't delete her presence, but they could minimize her influence. But Maya Blake had designed cities. She knew exactly how to rebuild from ruins. That evening, she received a secure audio message from Olivia. "Maya, listen carefully. We intercepted an internal Astrolix memo. Not public. Sent by someone inside the risk management team." A pause. "It mentions you by name." Maya sat down, breath steady. "It reads, close monitoring of guest M. Blake recommended. Previous complaint patterns suggest media leverage. Limit exposure without escalation." She didn't blink. "They know," she whispered to herself. She walked straight to the main deck. No makeup. No gown. No performance. Just presence. She stood beneath the chandelier, directly in front of the concierge desk, and waited. Helen Thatcher arrived 6 minutes later, composed. Perfect posture. Everything in place. "Maya," she said, smiling without warmth. "Was there something I can help you with?" "No," Maya replied. "I think we should talk." Helen blinked. "About what?" "About patterns," Maya said softly. "About staff protocol. About why my panel was removed from the public schedule. And why my Wi-Fi was disconnected after I declined your invitation." Helen's smile tightened. "That's a strong accusation." "No," Maya said. "It's a pattern. And I have documentation." Helen's jaw shifted slightly. "If you feel there's been a misunderstanding, you're welcome to file a report through our formal system." "I'm not here to fill out forms," Maya replied. "I'm here to make sure your system stops operating like a velvet-trapped exclusion machine." People nearby had gone quiet. A few heads turned. A few murmurs rose. But Helen didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in. "Miss Blake, I suggest you consider how visible you wish to make yourself. Some reputations are harder to preserve than others." There it was. The threat. Polished. Subtle. But sharp. Maya nodded slowly. "I agree," she said. "And some systems look much better in headlines than under a microscope." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply turned and walked away. And every step echoed louder than any confrontation ever could. The final day at sea dawned bright, almost insultingly so. The sky was a clean, polished blue. The sun warmed the decks like nothing had ever gone wrong aboard the Astrolix. But Maya Blake woke with purpose in her veins. This day wasn't about survival. It was about truth. At 8 a.m., the ship's executive lounge opened as usual. Champagne flutes lined the bar. Breakfast was served on white porcelain. And Helen Thatcher stood at the entrance, shaking hands with the high-tier guests, smiling as if nothing had changed. But everything had. At 8:07 a.m., Maya sent the file. It was scheduled, timed perfectly with the Astrolix media hour, when guest Wi-Fi signal was restored, and the ship's internal announcements were synced with social media platforms. The file was titled, "The Astrolix Divide, a Case Study in Modern Exclusion." Attached, internal video logs, staff interaction breakdowns, audio transcripts, emails, the submerged report, and a 900-word written statement by Maya Blake, titled "Invisible in First Class." By 8:12 a.m., the file was in the inboxes of every major equity-focused outlet in the U.S. By 8:15, Olivia confirmed the report had been mirrored on from major cloud servers. And by 8:17, Maya's foundation posted a public version, anonymized but irrefutable. At first, nothing changed. People sipped coffee. Servers continued smiling. Helen kept greeting guests with that same rehearsed warmth. But then, the shift. Phones buzzed. Tablets lit up. Eyes widened. One man, an investor from Chicago, put down his spoon mid-bite and muttered, "Is this real?" A woman gasped, then turned her screen to show the person beside her. A server, reading something on his watch, disappeared into the staff hallway. And finally, Helen moved. She turned, slowly, scanning the room, and found Maya already seated near the window, calm, composed, watching it unfold. Their eyes locked, and for the first time, Helen looked unprepared. An hour later, the captain himself requested a private meeting. Maya declined. "This is bigger than a conversation," she told the attendant. "Let him read." By midday, the whispers had turned to murmurs, and the murmurs to tension. Not outrage, not yet, but discomfort. Because truth, when dressed in receipts, has a way of cutting through even the most expensive air. Helen no longer greeted guests. She was seen pacing below deck, speaking into her phone, lips tight. Beatrice Lang had reportedly left the executive lounge early. Miles hadn't shown up to his shift at all. And Maya? She took her final lunch on the upper deck. Outside, in the sun, alone but not unseen. Several guests walked by. A few nodded. One woman, previously silent the entire trip, stopped beside Maya's table. "You've done something powerful," she said. "They won't say it out loud, but they're shaken." Maya looked up, eyes calm. "They should be." The woman hesitated. "Will you do something with it? Beyond the press?" Maya smiled faintly. "I already did." She tapped her tablet. Underneath the field's main page, she'd added a secondary submission direct to a global luxury watchdog organization, outlining Astrolix's discriminatory patterns and requesting a formal ethics review of their guest experience systems. And Olivia's team had already scheduled a virtual press conference with their partner nonprofit. This wasn't going to be forgotten. Not this time. That night, the ship's gala was held as planned, but the orchestra played to a half-filled ballroom. The laughter was forced, and the spotlight dimmer. Maya didn't attend. She sat on her balcony, watching the stars stretch across the ocean. She thought of the people who had endured this same quiet erasure on cruises, in boardrooms, at gala tables, without the tools to fight back, without proof, without support. But now, the silence had been shattered, and the system exposed. Not destroyed, not yet, but cracked. And through that crack, something had begun to shine. When the Astrolix docked the next morning, a small crowd of reporters was already waiting at the port. Maya didn't step into the spotlight. She walked quietly down the gangway, head high, bag light, heart steady. And for the first time in 10 days, no one told her where she could or couldn't stand, because she had already made her mark, not in their itinerary, but in their history. If this story moved you, if you felt the tension, the injustice, and the quiet strength of Maya Blake, then make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories that reveal the power structures we live in, and the people brave enough to stand against them. Watch more of our videos to discover what happens when the silent are no longer willing to be ignored.